is a famous hadith. Hadith mean statement or action attributed to the Prophet. That the Quran was revealed in Sabat Ahruf, meaning 7 mode, as you rendered. Can you explain this hadith?
Sure. So to connect it to the previous question, so we have now, we do know from the sources that Muslims were reciting in different ways. And now we come to the question of the chicken or the egg. So which came first? Do we have a statement, a real statement, authentic statement from the Prophet in which he said, well, the Quran was revealed in 7 different modes or 7 different ways. Therefore, you can read in any of those ways. Therefore, we do have those variant readings. They are legitimate. They are licensed by God. Or it's the other way around, where you do have variant readings, and then a hadith was fabricated, like many other hadiths. We can't talk now about fabrication of hadith, but we do know that fabrication of hadith was a phenomena. Or this hadith was fabricated in order to legitimize and explain the variant readings that we have in the tradition, right? So this hadith or this statement by the Prophet that the Quran was revealed in 7 different ways, we don't have any clear explanation by Muslim scholars. What does a mode or what does a harf mean? There are more than 30 different interpretations of this statement. There's really no consensus whatsoever on what it means. Some people said even it means, that the Quran has 7 different esoteric meanings or different interpretations. Some people said it has to do with commands, prohibitions, etc. And other people said, well, 7 different modes, it means those variant readings or those different ways of reciting the Quran. And this is, became the, I don't want to say a consensus, but this became, let's say, the majority of scholars would associate the 7 readings and more. We have 10 readings or 14 readings with the idea that the Quran could be recited and could be read in multiple ways.
In the 7 ahruf. Could I ask, this is Gabriel again, if we could just take a step back, because I'm worried this is actually pretty complicated, especially for people who are hearing these ideas for the first time, right? So we have this hadith, this saying of the Prophet Muhammad, in which he says, well, maybe you could give it to us exactly if you know what I mean. The Quran was revealed in Sabat Ahruf or Al-Ahruf al-Saba.
Yeah, so Unzil al-Quran ala Sabat Ahruf. So it was revealed according to 7 different modes.
And if you translate that literally, beginning students of Arabic will know that the word ahruf is the plural of the word harf, which means literally letter.
Correct.
But you argue it can't be a letter here, right? It's nonsense.
No, it doesn't make any sense. No one would say that, it means a letter. It just, and this is why the closest translation to it, I think Jeffrey translated it as mode, because it doesn't mean letter. It just means a way of recitation or, mode, so it doesn't mean letter exactly. So,
And when you speak about the chicken or the egg problem, you're comparing the real historical phenomenon of variant readings or systems of readings and the possibility that they are connected to this hadith, basically.
Correct, because they are connected. People, scholars, had to connect them together, because you can't have variant readings. What the only legitimate reason for having variant reading is this hadith.
Yeah. Can you talk about how to distinguish between what readings are canonical and non-canonical?
Yes.
And what criteria that scholars use to distinguish between the two?
Sure. So let's say up to the 900s, okay, so mid-10th century, there was no standard system, or there was, there was no collection or even a statement by religious scholars or political authority to say, well, the only valid readings of the Quran are those or this. There were many readings circulating within Muslims. not only 7, there were, according to sources, there were, 15, 24, even, a later scholar, his name is Al-Hudhali, he collected a book and called it the 50 variant readings of the Quran. Okay? So this multiplicity caused a problem. You don't want the Quran to be read in 50 different ways. And then, this man, Ibn Mujahid, came. He died in 324, 936 AD. And then he selected what we now call the 7 system or canonical readings of the Quran.
But Ibn Mujahid is not the first to collect variant reading, isn't it?
He's not the first one. There were attempts before him. There was Tabari, the great exegete and commentator. He had a book on variant readings. Abu Ubaid, another scholar, he had a book on 25 variant readings. There were other collections. He was not the first one to do that. But what seemed to happen with Ibn Mujahid, that he was closely connected to the court. He was aided by the vizier at that time. People who opposed him, there were many scholars who opposed Ibn Mujahid's idea to only limit the variant readings to 7. So 2 of his rivals, or 2 of the people who opposed him, they were tried in the court. They were flogged, put in prison. And there was, I don't want to say an enforced decree to only use those 7 readings, but it became, since that period, the system of Ibn Mujahid dominated other systems. That being said, many other scholars after Ibn Mujahid, they still wrote manuals on qira'at, on variant readings, 7, 8 readings, 9 readings, 10, 11, 12, 13. So it took time for Ibn Mujahid's system to really settle down and for Muslims to adopt it. So back to the question, what is canonical and what is not, again, back to the time period. Before Ibn Mujahid, there was no such thing as canonical and non-canonical. All variant readings were there. There was a vague consensus among scholars what to read and what not to read. But post that period, the consensus of the Muslim community agreed that those 7, we would consider them canonical, transmitted to us via tawatur, which means sound transmission that cannot be proven to be wrong. All other readings outside this system of the 7 started to be deemed as irregular, anomalous, i.e.
in this is a term that appears, the shawad, or that appears in the title of your book.
Correct. So the idea of shawad, something that I argued for, is that it is also a I don't want to say flexible, but it changes. The what is considered shawad now, irregular or anomalous, it was not anomalous 200 or 300 years ago. Mm-hmm. So by the same token, before Ibn Mujahid, what was considered to be anomalous, it became anomalous after Ibn Mujahid. People were reciting the anomalous readings before Ibn Mujahid in the mosque, liturgically. And because there was no official decree or there was no official consensus by legal scholars to say, well, you only have to stick to the 7 readings.
So this is where you get to the curious situation where someone like Tabari, who we mentioned is the great historian and exegete, is looked on by some later Muslim scholars as problematic for the way he negotiated the question of the readings.
Sure, because Tabari and many other early scholars, they don't fall within this fixed paradigm or this fixed, what became later on the consensus. He falls outside the consensus. And remember, consensus is always a retroactive thing. There was no such thing as, now in the year 320 or 936, all Muslim scholars agreed on something. It doesn't happen this way.
I think it's so interesting because on the one hand, we hear sometimes apologetic rhetoric about, unlike the Bible, every copy of the Quran around the world is the same. And you've given some examples from Africa, which show it's not exactly the case. But then on the other hand, it's just as orthodox, and actually maybe more orthodox to say, no, actually, it's a pluriform text with the 7 different readings. I have a version of the Mus'haf, or the Quranic text, which through a color system indicates all the variations for the 7 different readings. And this is not produced in the West by some Orientalist
no.
trying to complicate things, but it's coming from the Islamic world.
No, I 100% agree with you, and I really think this. This is in the past 150 years it was really politicized, and Muslim apologists in trying to basically defend against Orientalists and scholars who were trying to criticize the integrity of the Quran. I think they. I don't want to say they were not saying things that did not exist in the tradition, but I think they were cherry picking in some of the arguments from the tradition, and they were not really explaining how the whole notion of the variant readings or preservation of the Quranic text evolved over time. And it was just like as if it was a static notion that the Quran, was preserved. It was not falsified. It's verbatim transmitted to the Muslim community as is. And regardless of how minuscule these variations are from one codex to another, they exist. And Muslim scholars for hundreds of years, they acknowledged that. They were saying, well, look, we do have variations. We don't have a problem with that.
Right.
So when someone comes and tell you, well, no, there are no variations, well, that's not accurate.
It's more complicated.